I used to work as an overnight security guard at an old corporate building in Illinois. It wasn't a big place, just 5 stories tall, with a lobby, a long empty parking lot, and a few dozen offices. The kind of building that looked lifeless after 6 p.m. Every night, I'd sit behind the reception desk, flipping through my patrol logs, sipping cold coffee, and waiting for dawn. I did this job for 3 years straight. But there's one night I'll never forget. The night I truly believed I saw something that wasn't human. It started like any other night. It was early December, cold, silent, and the parking lot was covered in a thin sheet of frozen rain. The building's heating didn't always work properly, so I had my thick jacket zipped all the way up. Around 1:17 a.m., the lights suddenly flickered off, then back on again. Then, total darkness. I checked the control panel behind the desk, nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and radioed the maintenance guy who was supposed to be on standby. No response. That wasn't rare. He usually turned his radio off after hours. But something about the silence that night felt different. I remember hearing a faint tapping sound from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was just water dripping from a leaking pipe, but the sound was too deliberate, too steady. I walked toward the main hallway, flashlight in hand. As I pointed it down the dark stretch, the beam caught something, a shoe print on the tile. It was wet, like someone had just come in from the freezing rain outside, but there was no one at the front door. I followed the wet prints until they disappeared at the base of the stairwell that led up to the second floor. I should have called the cops right then, but part of me thought it was maybe just a delivery guy who got locked in, or one of the cleaning staff coming in late. I climbed the stairs slowly, my flashlight shaking slightly. The second floor was dead silent. The air felt unusually cold, and I could see my breath. When I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed something strange on my right. The door to the old server room was open. That door was always locked. I'd checked it not even an hour before. I stepped closer, whispering, "Hello? This area's off limits." Nothing. Just a lingering smell of metal and something else, like burnt hair. My flashlight started flickering. I smacked it and the beam steadied, but for a split second before it did, I swear I saw movement in the far corner, like a shoulder shifting, then disappearing. My heart started pounding. I called out again, "Hey, whoever's in here, you need to leave before I call the police." No response. Just that cold air and the faint hum of dead servers. I swept the flashlight slowly across the room, empty. No one hiding behind desks, no open vents, nothing. But when I turned back toward the doorway, the footprints were there again. And this time, they led back down the hall. But they were dry. I left the room, unnerved. My instincts screamed to go back to the front desk and wait it out. Maybe check the cameras once power returned. Halfway there, I heard something that made my stomach twist. The elevator dinged. That elevator hadn't worked properly since September. It only moved when you pressed the call button from inside the main lobby. But I wasn't anywhere near it. The ding echoed down the hallway, followed by the creaking sound of the elevator reaching my floor. I watched as the doors slowly opened. Inside, there was nothing, just darkness. Then I heard it, the sound of someone breathing. Slow, ragged, coming from inside that pitch-black elevator. I froze. My rational mind said to close the doors and ignore it. But the part of me trained to do my job felt like I needed to check. So I raised my flashlight and aimed it into the elevator. The beam cut through the dark and landed on something wet. It looked like a footprint, only larger. Barefoot. I stepped forward slightly, and the second I did, the elevator doors slammed shut. Not a soft closing, they slammed. And in that tiny fraction of a second before they snapped shut, I saw a pale face pressed against the metal frame, eyes wide open, mouth gaping in a silent scream. I stumbled back, breathing fast, my heart racing out of my chest. Then my radio crackled. "Lobby, where are you?" A faint voice whispered through static. It was the maintenance guy. "Finally, I'm on the second floor," I said, trying to sound calm. "The power's out. I think someone's in the building. Where are you?" The radio crackled again. "I'm in the lobby." The problem was, I could see the lobby from the stairs, and it was completely empty. "Stop messing around, man," I said. "If this is a joke, cut it out." But before I could finish, the radio emitted a noise I'll never forget. It sounded like a long, distorted breath, followed by quiet, wet laughing. Then the light on my radio turned off. By now, I was done. I wanted out, but my boss had drilled into us. Always check before leaving. So I figured I'd make one quick sweep, including the basement's storage level, then wait by the exit until sunrise. The basement of that building was always unsettling. The walls were unfinished concrete, and the lights flickered even on a good day. When I went down, I saw that all the ceiling bulbs were dead, except one in the far corner, just above the archives room. The door there was slightly ajar. As I got closer, it opened with a slow creak. Inside was a long row of filing cabinets, an old chair, and what looked like a toolbox in the corner. That's when I heard it again breathing. Only this time, right behind me. I turned instantly, swinging the flashlight around. Nothing there. The air felt charged, like static right before lightning strikes. And slowly, from the far end of the room, I noticed movement. There was someone crouched behind a cabinet. I could only see the top of their head, long black hair dripping wet, like they'd just come in from the rain. "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be here," I said, taking a step forward. No response, just the faint sound of fingernails scratching metal. Then she moved. Her head turned completely, impossibly far, until she stared right at me through that sheet of hair. Her skin was gray, and her eyes reflected the flashlight in a weird, glassy way. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a box. Suddenly, the lone light bulb above us started to swing violently on its cord, making the whole room flash between light and dark. And in that flicker, she wasn't crouched anymore. She was standing right in front of me. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I bolted out of there, up the stairs, breath burning in my throat. When I reached the lobby, the lights suddenly flickered back on. Everything looked normal again. The computer screens glowed softly. The clock said 3:11 a.m. I grabbed my bag and rushed out, locking the front door behind me. When I turned to glance back through the glass one last time, the elevator doors were open again. And on the floor, there was a trail of wet footprints leading right toward the lobby desk, the exact spot where I had been sitting earlier that night. I quit that job 3 days later. The company manager told me when they reviewed security footage, most of the cameras glitched out between 1 and 3 a.m., except one. That camera, facing the elevator, showed something I still can't explain. At 1:23 a.m., the elevator doors opened with no one inside. Then, a shadow, something vaguely shaped like a person, crawled out across the floor and vanished out of frame. The building is still there, still operational, but I've heard from other guards that strange things keep happening: power cuts, phantom calls, and doors slamming by themselves. One guy said he saw a face appear in the reflection of the elevator doors at night, and every time it happens, it's always around 1:17 a.m. I don't know what that thing was or who, but every time I drive past that building, I feel my chest tighten. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that same soft tap, tap, tap outside my window. When people ask about the worst job I ever had, I don't even hesitate. A few years ago, after a run of unemployment, I took a temporary security job through an agency. They threw me one of their least desirable sites, moonlight security at the old Wilton Memorial Hospital in Connecticut. It was supposed to be a quick 2-week gig, just until the property management company secured it against trespassers. The city had closed the hospital back in the late 1980s after a massive fire on the upper floors. Nobody had ever bothered to properly clean it out, so it was still full of broken beds, rotting files, and the faint, cloying stench of burned plastic. I thought it would be easy money just keep an eye out for trespassing thrill seekers or vandals. It turns out I was horribly wrong. By the time the second week ended, I barely made it out with my sanity. The first night was uneventful. Sitting behind a collapsed front desk, I listened to mice skittering beneath the warped vinyl floor tiles while updating my log every hour. The darkness was thick. Even my industrial flashlight only punched a soft yellow cone through the dust. Around 3 nights in, I started to notice the noises weren't all from mice. Sometimes, I'd hear a distant metallic crash, or what sounded like drawers slamming shut far down the unlit, abandoned corridors. More than once, I caught the echo of footsteps, deliberate, slow, heavy on the shattered tiles just outside my line of sight. My supervisor chalked it up to old pipes cooling off. He'd laugh and say, "It's an old building, kid. You'll hear all sorts of things at night, just don't spook yourself out." But the voices were what really rattled me. Right before dawn, as I passed through the burnt-out pediatric wing, I'd catch a whispery giggling, never loud, but always somewhere just around the next corner. On the 4th night of my shift, I decided to cover more ground. I wandered around floor 3, the wing hit hardest by the fire. All blackened paint and half-melted lights drooping from the ceiling like stalactites. I made a beeline toward the old psychiatric ward, a place I'd usually skip because the door was always chained shut. That night, though, the chain was on the floor and the door stood wide open. The sign above it, barely visible under the beam of my light, read, "Ward 7, Intensive Observation." Almost against my will, I stepped inside. The scorched hallway beyond was lined with reinforced doors, most hanging slack on their hinges. A cold draft swept over me, carrying an acrid scent. The air seemed thicker here, as if it weighed more. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the farthest room. I snapped the light that way, chest thumping. The door at the end, marked 701, gaped open. Inside, nothing. Just a toppled gurney and old patient forms littering the floor. But on the inside of the door, someone had scratched a message, deep and jagged. "Let us out." I turned and left that wing, feeling a prickle of dread crawl up my neck. Back at the front, my hand shook as I booted up the ancient CCTV terminal. The setup barely worked, flickering black and white cameras, most fogged up with decades of dust, but suddenly, every monitor blinked to life. In one camera, I saw a woman standing in the hallway toward 7, head lowered, long, stringy hair hiding her face. Her hospital gown was shredded, and her hands hung limply at her sides. Confused, I grabbed the walkie and tried to radio my partner Nick, who covered the outside lots. No answer. I panned the camera, she was gone. Every other camera showed static. Suddenly, someone whispered directly into my right ear. Not through the radio in real life, right there behind me. "Help us." I spun my chair around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just the wind rattling the glass. I didn't want to patrol anymore that night, but I had to. Around 3 a.m., my log required a sweep through the ER wing. This corridor was especially ruined by the fire-blackened walls, collapsed ceiling tiles, glass crunching underfoot. Halfway down the hall, I noticed a slow, wet sound, like water trickling. I aimed my light at the wall and saw a dark, sticky substance bubbling from cracks in the paint. Blood. Bright, fresh blood. snaking downward in veiny trails. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the flashlight. I tried rubbing the wall with my palm. The liquid stayed. It smeared warm and real onto my skin. My legs went weak. I bolted back to the lobby, hands shaking, dirt and blood sticking to my skin. My supervisor texted to shake it off, blaming it on rusty pipes. I never brought it up again. Nick, my partner, went missing halfway through my second to last shift. He was an ex-cop in his early 40s, a hard drinker, but good company, always cracking jokes to keep us awake. Near midnight, his radio cut out. I tried to call. Nothing. Then, while checking the eastern stairwell, I heard raucous laughter echo up from the lower floors, childlike, manic, totally out of place in an empty ruin at 1 a.m. I followed the sound, hard in throat, down to sub-basement level. The door to the morgue, melted from the old fire, stood slightly open. Inside, every slab was pulled out, the steel beds all empty, except for one. Nick lay flat on the table, eyes wide open, breathing fast. He muttered non-stop something about the kids and the lady. No matter how hard I shook him, he wouldn't snap out of it. His skin felt like ice. I called 911. They found no explanation for his catatonic state, but the site doctor swore Nick suffered a severe psychological episode. After that, nobody wanted to cover the shifts with me. But my paycheck depended on the job, so I tried to finish out the week alone. The final night, I gathered my nerve and made my rounds. The rumor at the agency was that the children's wing was where the fire started. A nurse supposedly went mad and locked several patients inside. The details were always vague, but the place was notorious. At 2 a.m., as I passed by that hallway, all the emergency lights suddenly flickered back to life, red and groaning above every door. The laughter returned, dozens of voices, some giggling, some weeping, some shrieking with joy. The hair on my arms stood up. As I passed one room, my light caught 5 small faces pressed against the glass, their breath fogging up the window. Their eyes were hollow, black, staring through me. One small hand tapped weakly. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move. They spoke. All at once, a quiet chorus. Don't leave her here. Suddenly, the door at the far end exploded open. A woman in a shredded nurse's uniform stumbled into the hall, skin burned, mouth stretched in a soundless scream. The children's faces vanished in an instant. I backed away, tripping over a fallen IV pole. I ran. All the emergency doors sealed behind me, slamming down with a bone-shaking crash. Desperate, I made for the only exit I could, the roof. Through the main stairwell, the walls there were covered in hundreds of scratched messages. We're still here. Don't let her in. She burns. As I climbed, I looked down through the central stairwell's gaps. I saw the nurse ascending, impossibly fast. Her arms contorted, burned skin peeling as she shrieked a high-pitched wail. At the top, the door wouldn't budge. I slammed my fists on it, screamed for help. Behind me, the nurse hurtled onto the landing, except now, her face split open in a raw grin. She reached for me, her hands smoking, fingers melting into the metal railing. I felt a blistering heat on my back, an overwhelming urge to vomit. Just as her hands touched my neck, the stairwell lights exploded, plunging us into darkness. For a moment, all I could hear were her ragged breaths and the chanting of children's voices echoing up the empty shaft. Don't let her in, don't let her in. I must have blacked out. When sunrise finally came, I woke, slumped outside the back doors. My head throbbed, my skin ached, and my shirt was scorched down the back. The hospital doors were all locked, chained from the outside. My supervisor said nobody had touched them since midnight. A police officer took my statement. but didn't believe a word. The agency fired me for abandoning my post. Nick never returned to work. He left the state. I suffered from nightmares for months, sometimes waking to the sound of soft tapping on my bedroom window or a faint burning smell in the air. They finally demolished Wilton Memorial last year to put up condos. But sometimes, when I drive past the site, I see children out of the corner of my eye. And in certain dreams, I walk those burnt corridors again. And always, I hear the nurse whisper, "You promised you wouldn't leave me here." This is a story I've never told anyone outside my own family. I worked security for nearly a decade, but nothing ever came close to what happened during my last assignment. The memories are still raw, but if you're the type who's ever wondered what happens in dark, empty buildings after hours, you might want to keep the lights on for this one. 3 years ago, I landed what I thought was a great gig night security supervisor for an upscale high-rise known as the Towers at Seaview. This was the kind of place that boasted its own private rooftop pool, a marble lobby, and condos worth millions. I figured the biggest threat would be drunk tenants stumbling home after bar crawls. I did my training during the day, but my real job didn't start until 10 p.m. My shift was simple: walk floors every 2 hours, check for intruders, and keep an eye on the lobby cameras. There were always rumors, unhappy tenants, a break-in a few years back, but nothing out of the ordinary for a city building. If only someone had warned me about the 17th floor. The first 2 nights were peaceful. Routine passes, a stray false alarm, the usual paperwork. But on my 3rd night, I noticed something odd on the cameras. A flicker of movement in the northeast hallway on 17. A shadow, just at the edge of sight, passing in front of a unit I knew was vacant. Thinking it was a tenant or maybe a maintenance worker, I logged it and forgot. But when the front desk called to ask if I could check a noise complaint same hallway, my tension grew. I rode the elevator up, flashlight and radio clipped to my belt. The hall was dead silent, carpet swallowing my footsteps. As I got near the unit, a wave of cold air rushed past so biting I could see my breath fog in the beam of my light. I tried the door to unit 1714, locked solid. That's when I realized the security tag, which I always tape across the empty units to check for tampering, was split clean down the middle as if someone had gone in, but never come out. On night 5, the knocking started, always between 1 and 1:30 a.m. First soft, then louder, echoing from inside 1714. The unit had been empty for a year, the old tenant apparently dying while they slept. Management said the family never removed the furniture, just locked the door and left. I called the building manager each time. He told me the same thing. Ignore it. Old pipes. This floor creeps everyone out. But no explanation could account for what I saw on the hallway cam. Just after the knocking, the shape of a figure, standing motionless outside the door. Not an outline, not a shadow. It almost pulsed, like TV static. Its face, if you can call it that, looked blurred, as if a camera was distorting it on purpose. On Saturday night, my nerves shot. I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed the spare master key, swiped in, and tried to open unit 1714. The lock gave way with a heavy groan. Inside was cold, sharper, and deeper than the hallway. The furniture was all dust sheets and plastic, the sunlight blocking curtains drawn tight. It should have been empty, but in the middle of the living room, facing away from me, stood a woman in a faded red housecoat. Her feet were bare. Her head was bowed. Black hair spilled over her shoulders and down her cheeks. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. I said, "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be here. Are you lost?" No answer. I stepped closer, repeating myself. But she only trembled, not in fear, but in some strange, rhythmic way. like she was barely holding herself together. I reached out, not sure why, just wanting to get her attention. As my hand brushed her shoulder, she spun. Her face was impossible. No skin, just a blur, like static, with eyes deep and dark, flickering with movement. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out, only a rush of cold air, so strong it forced me a step backward. My flashlight died. The room blinked black, and when I got the power back, she was gone. Only thing left was a cold, wet patch on the carpet. The master key still in my hand. The sheeted couch behind me, wrongfully empty. I convinced myself I'd seen a squatter, or maybe my imagination got the best of me. But the next night, the front desk got a frantic phone call from a tenant on 17. They said a woman in a red housecoat was scraping her nails along every door. 2 minutes later, the elevator lost power for 3 floors. I rushed to check. Every tenant I met said they saw someone walking up and down, muttering, fingers bleeding. I never found a trace, but outside 1714, there was a bloody smear across the number plate. On the security cameras, the time code jumped. 1 minute, empty. The next, a blurry figure pressed flat against the lens, face indistinguishable. My sleep got worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of those hallways, always the 17th floor, always lights flickering off, always the shape lingering just past the reach of my flashlight. I started to make mistakes, logging false alarms that never happened, losing my train of thought during incident reports. The other guards whispered that I was coming unglued, but the events only got weirder. Maintenance called about electrical spikes every night at exactly 1:17 a.m. Static bursts on all the lobby TVs. Chilling, guttural sobbing in the eastern stairwell. Worst of all, tenants reported seeing the elevator stall at 17, doors jammed open, lights pitch black inside. When engineers inspected, they claimed nothing was technically wrong. I decided to make my final stand on a Wednesday night in late November. At 1:10 a.m., I rolled the cameras to floor 17, watching as the usual shadow drifted into sight. For the first time, she turned to face the camera. Shadows pooled in her eye sockets, like ink dripping from a wound. She lifted a hand and pointed up, to the roof. I shot up the stairs, flashlight in one hand, pepper spray in the other. The rooftop door was cold to the touch, covered with condensation, though it was a mild night. As I pushed it open, the city spread before me, silent, glowing. For a split second, I thought all was normal. Then I heard the quick, soft shuffle of bare feet behind me. I whirled, but there was no one. Except, as I passed the stair door, I caught a reflection in the glass. The woman in the red housecoat was right behind me, her arms stretching impossibly long, nails scraping the metal frame. Her head cocked so far to the side it seemed snapped. She whispered, "Why did you leave me behind?" The voice was not just in my ears, it was in my head, rattling my bones. I ran for the stairwell, but the door had slammed shut, locking. Then I saw, on the parapet, a faint trail of bare, bloody footprints. The wind howled, carrying desperate, angry whispers. "He broke his promise." In the city lights, I made out dozens of figures blurry, floating just at the roof's edge, all dressed in old nightgowns or hospital smocks, faces blurred, eyes hollow. The woman grew nearer, gliding, not walking. The red housecoat dragged along the gravel, tearing at her feet. I pressed back against the concrete, yelling for help, but my radio only spat white static. She stopped inches from my face. The city seemed to vanish. It was just us, cold black sky, and her whisper. "It hurts to be forgotten." The howling figures shrieked at once, a wall of anger and pain that made my nose bleed and my vision spin. I closed my eyes. And then, sudden silence. I woke up on the 8th floor landing, head ringing. My flashlight and keys were gone. I stumbled down to the lobby, pale and drenched in sweat. The day guard, Mark, gave me a worried look. When I tried to explain, all I managed were fragments. Woman on the roof, 17th floor, can't leave. He told me 1,714's family finally sold the unit that week after years of legal battles. The cleaners coming in that morning reported a strong stench of decay, and marks scratched into the inside of every window. Please remember me. I quit on the spot. In the weeks after, I had vivid nightmares. Sometimes, I'd wake up with bloody scratches on my arms or legs. I saw patches of red at the edge of rainy puddles, always turning toward empty hallways. I got a new job daytime only. I still drive past the towers every month or so. Unit 1,714's window is always dark, always closed, no matter how bright the city shines. Sometimes, I wonder if that woman is still waiting, or if someone else hears her now, walking the quiet halls she can never quite leave. If this story got under your skin, share your scariest workplace experience in the comments, or just let me know what I should cover next. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying true tales. And if you ever get assigned to the night shift on the 17th floor, try not to answer any knocks at the door.